Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to realestateinvestormba.com. At Real Estate Investor MBA, we strive to provide valuable information from various experts within the business and real estate community, covering real-time market and economic information as well as curriculum-level material within various real estate investing niches. We aim to be relevant, straightforward, and forthcoming with actionable information for our community. And here's your hosts, Tejas Gosai and Jeremy Moyer.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to realestateinvestormba.com. I am joined with my co-host, Jeremy Moyer. Jeremy, thanks
Hello.
for being here. And my name is Tejas Gosai, and we have the honor of speaking with Pete. How do I say the last name?
Reinke.
Didn't want to mess that up. So Pete Reinke, who has been in the real estate development world for many, many years. And just over the past few years, he worked for a great company nearby called Ashley Development Corporation that has done a ton of projects in the community. And Pete, what exactly was your position with that group?
So I was vice president of development for Lou and Lisa Vector at Ashley.
Which we'll talk about could not have been an easy task, and a lot of the variables that you've had to deal with. But we're super excited. This is Real Estate Investor MBA, where we are doing our best to share some insights about what's happening in the community and how some of the best experts in the community are adapting to the change. With that, Jeremy, let's get some stuff going.
Absolutely. Pete, thanks again for joining us. Can you just tell us a little bit more, fill in the gaps of Tejas' intro and kind of like, how you get started, where did you come from, how did you get from the start of your career to kind of where you're at right now?
Sure, absolutely. So thanks for having me, guys. So I grew up in Philadelphia. First came to the Lehigh Valley to go to college at Lafayette. And when I graduated from there in 1985, I went back to Philly and I started my real estate career with a company called the Seltzer Organization. And the Seltzer Organization had an interesting premise where they bought land at all of the exits of the Pennsylvania Turnpike surrounding Philadelphia. And so it was a really good model. So you went from the Chamonix to Willow Grove to Fort Washington to Valley Forge. And that's how I got started. I started out working for them as a courier and then morphed into doing sales and leasing for them for about 5 years. And then in 1990, I moved back here to Easton for good, actually to coach basketball, college basketball at my alma mater at Lafayette. And after doing that for 5 years, I segued back into commercial real estate. And commercial real estate economic development is what I've been doing since 1995 in our Lehigh Valley community.
That's tremendous. Wow. That's a lot of experience in the field, especially the commercial real estate field. So I saw that you were at the Economic Development Corporation in Lehigh Valley for a few years. What did you do there?
Yeah, so I was there for 8.5 years, and I was in charge of it was VP of Regional Development. And so basically my job there was to recruit businesses into our Lehigh Valley community. And so it was a really rewarding job. I got to work with all of the local real estate players, all the local political players, and I was kind of the point person to go out to conferences and to companies that were not from this region and locate them here. One of the highlights of that job was going over to Germany and Israel by myself. Wow. to recruit some international firms here. And so that's one of the things I would say over my career here that has been most gratifying is how the Lehigh Valley has grown as a place that not just national, but international companies feel that this is a place to be. We have a lower cost of living compared to New York and Philly, but we're accessible to both those markets and have some really good corporate leaders here. So that's sort of the highlights when I was there. I spent 8.5 years there. It's a fantastic organization. I think you both know now under Don Cunningham's leadership at LVEDC is one of the top 20 economic development organizations in the country, not top 20 mid-sized groups, not top 20 East Coast groups, but top 20 national groups. And so Don and his team have been knocking out of the park and will continue to do so to grow this community.
Can I jump in and ask about that in those international efforts? Was that, I mean, obviously it's to get some outside money over here. Was there like EB-5 lending or any of that stuff?
It's interesting that it wasn't at that time. Again, we were focused on both startup companies and some high-level companies, piggybacking on what B. Braun and others have done here. There's a company called Palram Suntef out in New Smithville that's an Israeli company. So it was really just bringing those companies and their jobs here. The EB-5 thing is something that I think is really important. It's never, I haven't seen it take hold in the Lehigh Valley. It was, it's big in Philly and other big cities. It would be nice to take advantage of that more, I would think.
Yeah, for sure. Just for our viewers and listeners, EB-5, if you look it up, pretty easy to Google search it, is outside international investors invest X amount of dollars, I think it's $1 million, into the United States in a business that generates U.S. employment. And over time, I think it's years, if they continue their investment, they're rewarded with a U.S. citizenship at some point. And so the U.S. government came up with this years ago. So that's really cool that you got to do some of those things. I can't imagine being like a fly on the wall with some of those meetings and how intense it must have been.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And again, interestingly enough, before I joined LBEDC, I worked for the governor's action team. I worked under Governor Rendell. And so doing a similar thing, bringing companies into the Commonwealth. And those meetings were really interesting because if you guys remember, Governor Rendell, who again is still active in Philadelphia, he was a guy that was such a great salesman that he'd walk into a company, an out-of-state or an international company, and his presence just, brought people to say, man, I want to come to Pennsylvania. And so I had kind of a 4-county region, including Lehigh Valley, and had some real good successes. We brought Olympus into the community and really started the whole drive of national industrial developers being here. If you look at this industry, again, not everybody in this community loves the big box warehouses, but what it's done is it's gotten probably the top 20 national developers all have a presence here. And the companies that are here are wonderful high-level companies. Again, we'd like to see more manufacturing, more office jobs, but the warehouse distribution market is an important one, and it employs many of our fellow Lehigh Valley folks.
Makes a lot of sense. So Pete, I want to kind of go on a new series of questioning. So, within a lot has happened over the last couple months, right? With everything with the pandemic and everything, within commercial real estate, as a sector whole, and I know there's a lot of sectors that make that up, and everyone is, can be evaluated on a different level. But as a sector whole, like, what are you seeing, in the meetings that you're kind of in right now, and the developmental stages with these companies, within just commercial, like either office, healthcare, retail? What are they putting mitigation plans in place? Are they, preparing for a large downturn? Kind of like what's being done? What do the conversations look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a time of high anxiety for many people. I think the retail business, there's a real concern about, with social distancing, how that's going to come back. Again, we have such a vibrant community here in the Lehigh Valley, and so many, local entrepreneurial restaurateurs that I think that will resolve that issue eventually, long term. The office market is interesting because, again, so many people from working out of home now are finding they might not have to go to an office again. So, I have some concern that the large office users won't have the need for the space anymore. And again, when the space isn't needed, that's a concern for large real estate developers. So I think that that's something that will continue to be a concern. When it comes to the warehouse distribution market, this is an internationally known location. So I can only see that getting bigger and better. And again, I know you guys follow this, but if you're dealing with the chamber or LBDC or other, development leaders here, I think there's always a concern that as COVID continues to go, that some people might leave our Lehigh Valley community and go to more rural parts of Pennsylvania or go down south or the Midwest. But my sense is that will be dwarfed by the number of people that come into this community from New York and from New Jersey and all those other places that we already have social distancing here. You know, we can all leave our houses and go for a bike ride or a run or a swim. So many of us within a mile or two from our home that you just don't get in Manhattan or Philadelphia or downtown Washington, D.C. So I think the Lehigh Valley market will still be a strong real estate market no matter what happens. And again, as I touched on earlier, one of the key things is, you know, our world will always be international and getting supplies here and getting manufacturing here. And so as we saw with the COVID and needing masks and needing other equipment, that we had to get it from overseas. And that was very, very hard. And, you know, could potentially be complicit in people losing their lives because there wasn't available equipment. And I think now we recognize that we have so many generations of manufacturers that are from this community that now we can, I think that we'll see more of that in the Lehigh Valley and in Pennsylvania, manufacturing of some products that we need. It'll never be as inexpensive as it is overseas, but the need to get the product to the people, you know, trumps everything. So that's an answer.
Trumps everything.
I know. That was not I did not intend that as a pun, but you can take it that way.
That's great. So, Pete, what advice? So we have a whole range of listeners. You know, from the novice investors getting started in looking at buying their first duplex, or investors that they own thousands of units. Both residential, commercial. What advice would you have for investors? That you're seeing or hearing on how to either diversify or mitigate sort of risk in this environment right now? Is it a good time to get started in real estate investing? What kind of words of wisdom would you relate to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always, it's a good question, because I think people are always concerned. Obviously, this is something that none of us have ever seen, and people are concerned about, what to do, and there's a nervousness, and people are scared, and things like that. And one of the key things that, again, I'm sure you all know, is the pipeline in real estate is so important. So the last 3 or 4 months, when everybody's been at home, and those that are continuing to work and have discussions, I think are going to come out ahead of time, because if you take 3 months off, you don't necessarily see it in the real estate game as an immediate. But 9 months from now, 18 months from now, the things that should have started in spring and early summer of 2020 didn't start for many people, and so there's going to be a void there. So I think it's kind of that down the line issue is going to be a concern. When you bring up the local investors and things like that, something that I think, again, in our Lehigh Valley market that's critically important is the growth of higher ed, the colleges and universities, and especially with Lafayette in Easton and Lehigh in Bethlehem, is student housing and employees and graduate students and things like that. And those are opportunities that a lot of smaller investors and larger investors have gotten into, either build buildings or convert buildings. And so I'm really interested to know in the next 60 days what's going to happen in terms of people coming back to school and how that'll affect investors. But I think, during my career here, in the old days, there weren't a lot of outside investors. We now have outside investors, and there's a stereotypical thing that people don't like, absentee landlords. I cannot stand absentee landlords. Somebody that lets a property in Allentown, Bethlehem, or Easton deteriorate is a horrible thing. But in these days, outside money and outside developers and outside interest into this community is not a bad thing at all. And so there's some very positive things that can happen. So I think that there's continues to be opportunities, I think, to diversify both product type and geography is probably a wise move.
If I could just jump in real quick on that, I just pulled up the information for Lehigh University. I don't know if you guys heard, but they're planning on reopening to some degree. This came out a couple of weeks ago. And, with everything that's happening, a lot of people are leaning on Lehigh to open up.
That's for sure.
To see what happens. But also, my wife works at Muhlenberg College, and they're kind of dealing with what's going on with their students. And then my partner, James, his wife works at DeSales University. So we've got a really good pulse on, what's happening. We actually have a closing that took place this past Friday on Lehigh University student housing. That was extremely tumultuous over the past couple months getting to closing, but it did come through. Just to let you know that inside of that, the parents, they're responsible for the leases, and so there was no misstep in payment, and the new lease is going to take over. There's a couple international students. So I'm in the weeds seeing that stuff. And a lot of people are they're worried about nationally or looking at different statistics and metrics. And, I don't really watch the news that much. I try to stay in a Lehigh Valley bubble, and this has not stopped. I mean, our phones have been like Christmas. Everything's lighting up. Our inventory is moving pretty quickly. But to go back to your point, there are a lot of people afraid of what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And that's just where, we can't mitigate that risk. But there's people who are like, so what? 7, 8 months ago, I couldn't have anticipated COVID, and it was okay to some degree.
It's very interesting that you bring that up, because one of the key things now, again, is we keep coming back to, it's the social distancing aspect that's going on now, but might need to be going on for a long time. And you bring up DeSales, and one of the interesting things, one of the projects that I was working on with the Pectors that's now going forward is something that's called 3rd and Polk Street. And I think you guys probably remember the building where Molinari's and Pliables is, right on East 3rd Street there. And what's happening now is that the top 2 floors of that building that used to house St. Luke's corporate offices is being converted to student housing. And the focus had been graduate students and international students from Lehigh. But what was really interesting is that Northampton Community College, Penn State Lehigh Valley, and DeSales, and to some extent Moravian, were also having students that, even though the couple of those campuses, DeSales, is a more, the suburban-y, rural type campus, the people wanted to be around other like-minded people, other young people, other international people. And so that was a really key market for the use of both that building and some others there, is to get people around. And so now, with having to keep your distance, I'm not sure how well that plays. My sense is, because our Lehigh Valley is so unique. Again, you walk a block away from 3rd Street, and you have the trail that goes through South Bethlehem. So I think you can keep your distance, but again, you still want to be around, other human beings, other like-minded human beings. I think that's a really interesting, point that you made. And again, I think our schools here have been really good with what they're doing officially on campus as institutions. But there's always that need for the private sector to do supplemental projects. And I would see, both here locally and nationally, that model could change. Maybe the colleges don't invest as much in projects and let the developers take the risk. We'll see. But that could be opening. Again, Lafayette's about to open a very large dorm that right off on the edge of campus, and similar to Lehigh. So that's a little bit of that perspective.
Interesting. What's your thoughts, Pete, on I think Easton just there was a project in Easton for co-working. There was a co-working building that was just opened, and I know there's some. Allentown has some similar projects downtown. What's your take on that market, or even the work from home professional? Like, if there's opportunities there for development, what's your take on those 2 markets?
It's been interesting, because for all the positives that have happened in the Lehigh Valley, one of the negatives is we haven't really had that co-working space. Mm-hmm. And, J.B. Riley's tried to do it with all the work he's doing in downtown Allentown, but the project that you're referencing now, they're looking at doing one in Easton. They just, they're opening one in South Bethlehem in the Benner's building where Zest is, right by Lehigh. And I think, again, the new normal, as is stereotypically is said. I'm not sure what that means, but I believe very strongly of that interaction amongst other businesses. And so we need to have more of that co-working space. Both at my LVDC days and again, the last few years, we've tried to reach out to some of those national players to bring in the co-working space. And they just weren't ready to come into the Lehigh Valley market yet. And so some more entrepreneurial folks are looking at doing that. But I think that's something that, again, even keeping our distance, I think you need interaction. And again, even being able to do what we're doing now and Zooming, it's much better to come in and talk and do StreamYard and do whatever. It's much better to me to be able to see somebody even briefly for a cup of coffee. It's just that touch. You think about something as you're talking, or you look over somebody's shoulder and say, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Whereas when we're here on our own places, you don't get that opportunity as much. But I think that needs to stick around. And because people will be cutting back their larger office footprints, the larger employers, I think there's a need for that co-working space. I really do. In Easton, there's a really cool project, the Commoner, that's coming up, that a really good younger developer from New York, Garrett Vassell, is coming into, and he's going to create a rooftop restaurant and some high-level apartments, and then he wants to put some co-working space in there. And again, Easton could really use that. Easton's such a great restaurant and small business town, but it's got some opportunities to grow a little bit of that corporate office footprint.
Let me jump in and ask you, I'm in the weeds. I'm always very subjective with the information, but I do look at the objective, and I'm always trying to figure out new resources and things like that. You clearly know a ton and have been here for quite a bit. What local resources do you rely on, internet wise, or newspapers, or how do you get your info?
I mean, I think the key thing for information is always talking to as many other key players as you can. Again, this community has been blessed with some really good local and regional leadership. So, again, you got the Chamber of Commerce and Tony Iannelli, you got Don Cunningham at LVDC, but then resources that people don't realize as much as the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, led by Becky Bradley, that deals with all of our 62 municipalities, and they're on the cutting edge in terms of providing statistics and details and data that's critically needed. Justin Parembo and the Greater Lehigh Valley Association of Realtors, that's where all the realtors are involved. So working with them, and then you've got interesting players like the Manufacturers Resource Center and Discover Lehigh Valley and Ben Franklin Technology Partners and the Workforce Investment Board, that all have their different niches in terms of providing information, providing connections, those types of things. And then I'm an old-fashioned guy. One of my dear friends just lost his father, who was 88 years old, and at the eulogy, they were saying how he read 5 or 6 newspapers a day. I still try to read 3 or 4 hard copy newspapers, despite the fact that we can scroll through our phones and find stuff. So I think it's great to have that information. So there's just, it's each person has their own different ways. My way always was to talk to as many people as I could, talk to not just bankers and brokers, but talk to my rivals. I'm always a guy that you talk to, why would you talk to your direct competitor? It's first of all, they're good human beings, and second of all, they're smarter than I am. So why would I not pick their brain if I had a chance to? So there's a lot of that happened.
One thing I don't think you mentioned too is I think you're active in the chambers and things like that. Rotary?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've been part of all those things when you get to be 57 years old and been around all the time. I was the president of the Easton Rotary at one point, and then wasn't able to go to the meetings anymore. So haven't done that anymore. Right now, you think about boards and organizations, one that's really interesting and for you guys and the listeners is also interesting is there's a group I've been part of called LINC, L-I-N-C. It was a group, a nonprofit that was formed at Lehigh 5 years ago. And what it does, guys, is it helps our 16 largest employers, or 16 of our largest employers, Lafayette and Lehigh, the 2 healthcare networks, and then our, Lutron, Olympus, Air Products, players like that. What they do is when they recruit somebody not from the tri-state area into this community.
Is this it? It's with Lehigh University?
I think so. It's not the Lehigh Involvement Code. I can't see that too well, but it's Yeah, what it does is when those organizations recruit people who are not from this area, what Link does is works with the spouse and the children to find a job for your spouse or your partner, a school district for the kids, a place to live. That's their website there. And it's been a really wonderful thing for me, because one of the key things about this Lehigh Valley community, and I don't know if you two even know this, for years I've had this group, they call it Friends of Pete. It's a big LinkedIn thing. And we would monthly have these happy hours, and I'd get 125 people a week. It's actually a group on LinkedIn now. And my point in telling you that is people would come up and say, the Lehigh Valley can be parochial. And I said, well, every community is parochial. But if you show up and go to chamber events and LVDC events and come to this Friends of Pete thing and join Link, it doesn't matter if you don't live or work in this community, as long as you show up. If you don't say, I can't make an 8 a.m. meeting because I'm not here. I can't make a 6 p.m. meeting because I'm not here. But the point in why Link is so important is when people are hired by those companies, instead of living out of the region, they want to live here, because then they can run into people at church and at their kids' practices and all these other kind of things. And so it just continues to drive what's going on in this community. It makes it a welcoming area. And so things like that, people don't realize the impact that it has on the real estate community and the investment community, but it has a huge impact. So those are some groups that I think are really important and are under-recognized or under-known. And again, it's why I always, love what you guys are doing in terms of getting the word out there. People, you don't know if they don't tell you. And when you're able to share some of that information, I think it's extremely important and extremely helpful.
I have one last question on mine. I don't know about Tejas, if you have any additional ones, but looking at just the Lehigh Valley, I think I told you, through email, one of the main missions and visions where we see this, we have this podcast and what we're doing with it is they're trying to take the Lehigh Valley as like a live case study, kind of like how business schools do case studies, and how, where it was, how it's going through the pandemic and how it's going to blossom and continue growing. Would you say, in your assessment that, it is still thriving through the pandemic, where, maybe things needed to change here or change their businesses, obviously need to pivot with their business model, but do you see it slowing down at all over the next couple of years, or do you see it just steamrolling right through this and coming out bigger and better?
Yeah, no, I think, again, with what's going on now, it's been bad. And, again, all the retailers that close and the smaller businesses, again, one of the things that we touch on is the critical importance of small businesses, both the opportunity to start them and to let them grow into either community institutions or grow into larger businesses. So I absolutely believe in my heart that and it's not a pipe dream that this community will continue to be a strong, growing community. I don't know if you guys are, big sports fans. I'm a sports junkie, and one of the analogies that I always use is, even though I love American sports, I'm a big fan of European soccer. And if you know anything about that, or anybody listening knows anything about that, is one of the cool things about European soccer is that every year in the top leagues, the bottom 3 teams get kicked into the minor leagues, and the best 3 come up. And that analogy works because of how successful the Phantoms and the Iron Pigs have been. But I use that analogy in real estate and sports, where we're the community where, it's a stereotype, punching above your weight. But we are now, over the last number of years and going forward, we're comfortable playing in the big leagues with LA and Chicago and DC and places like that. But we still know that we're a smaller thing. So, the fans can actually know the players and actually have this engagement. But, when you look at, second tier kind of markets, we've won that battle. It's like, we're there to stay. And as I said, in the real estate world, when you talk about warehouse and distribution and stuff like that, we're known as a national market. So people that are in large international corporations, when they look to put warehouse and distribution in the U.S., they go to the Inland Empire by LA, they go to somewhere in Texas, they go to Chicago, Atlanta, and Lehigh Valley. And, it's Eastern Pennsylvania. It's like, it's us, and so we're a name brand now. And so in terms of developing investment strategies and having people learn, and have opportunities here in this market, it's great. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm a huge proponent of our 11 colleges and universities. And we have so many smart people of the Lehigh Valley community who have come here to go to school here, who could learn from people like you guys and others. And it's like, I'd love to be an investor and I want to do this, but we can teach them and get them started here in our area and either keep them or let them grow into, national players. So I think there's a lot of really good opportunities, but I'm very, very optimistic about our long-term opportunities in the Lehigh Valley.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy.
Yeah, that was awesome. You're doing a really good job. I'm just pulling up like the universities and colleges nearby and how important they are. I want to say one thing and then have a fun question. So this has gone by too fast. You are very knowledgeable and kind of the best spokesperson I've heard in a while for the Valley. So we look forward to having you back on the show. And just one fun thing I like to get out there is for you particularly, what do you think is a good restaurant or cigar bar or something to congregate when COVID's okay? Do you have a particular favorite in the Lehigh Valley? Anything like that?
So I won't sort of answer that question because I have a ton of favorites. Again, when I said about this Friends of Pete, we've been doing this for years using all of our restaurants. But because I'm over here in the Easton area, I'm particular to Easton especially. And I can't even pick a restaurant over there. Again, when people are back out in downtown, it's like the mix between River Grill and Blue and Third and Ferry and Setaluna and Pearly Bakers and all these things that whatever type of different food you want. You have Troy Renard with Two Rivers Brewing, Juan Martinez, who I think you guys know with Don Juan is now opening a new restaurant. So to me, it depends on time of day, day of the week, whatever, where I go. But there's a whole bunch of them. There's too numerous to mention. Again, those are all the people I mentioned. It's not a name dropping thing. It's like those are people that are of and from this community that do things. And as I said before, in terms of competition, it's like, sure, they compete for business, but they all kind of have each other's back. And that's one of the things that people do not realize about the Lehigh Valley is we have each other's back before we go after, try to go after each other's business.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to your next steps. And if you don't mind, this is my open invite. We like to have you back on in a month or two. But thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your knowledge. We're sharing Pete's information below if you want to get in touch with him. Pete, if somebody wanted to email you or something, can you share your info?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big texter. It's one of the few things I do with technology. So people can actually call me if they want. It's 610-442-9398. And then my email now is phrjr1@gmail.com. But happy to share that. Happy to come back on the show anytime, guys, and anybody else I can connect you to. But I appreciate you putting this together. You're doing great work, and I'm just trying to keep up with people like the two of you.
Thank you. Awesome. So that's Jeremy Moyer. That way. And we have Pete Reinke. Got the name right, won't forget it. This is realestateinvestormba.com. Check out our website and some of our previous guests. Thank you so much, and we'll check you out next time. Cheers.
Thank you.